Okay, Chairman, we are live on YouTube.
Thank you.
Okay, we can start. Councillor Over.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dan, and welcome everybody to the Audit Committee meeting of the 16th of November 2020. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's YouTube page. Due to the government guidance on social distancing, this meeting is being held remotely. A decision summary and minutes of the meeting will be produced in the usual way, and a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the Council's YouTube page. To enable the meeting to run in an orderly manner, I would ask all members of the committee to keep their video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep their microphone muted, except when I invite them to speak. Officers will join us to introduce their reports in the usual way. Any members wishing to ask questions to make a comment should indicate this by clicking the raised hand function in the participant screen. This is the blue hand. When I invite you to speak, please unmute your microphone, ask your question, and then mute it again to allow the officer to respond. As with all new arrangements, especially those involving new systems, there is always a risk that we may run into technical problems, and I'd ask for your patience if we do. Should this occur, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it's not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. I will begin by asking Dan Kelly, the Democratic Services Officer, to do a roll call of the members of the committee if members can confirm their attendance. Okay, Dan?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gold.
I'm present, Dan, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fowler.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Here, Dan.
Thank you. Councillor Joseph.
I'm here. Good evening.
Thank you. Councillor Sanford.
Yes, I'm here. I'm substituting from Councillor Shahid.
Thank you. Councillor Warren.
Here.
Thank you. And yourself, Chair.
Yes, present.
Okay.
Okay, item one. Oh, are you going to talk about the officers present, Dan, or not?
Yes, just to inform our members and the public that we have Pete Carpenter, the Acting Director of Corporate Services, got Fiona McMillan, the Monitoring Officer. We have members Neil Harris and Dan Cook from Ernst & Young. We have Sam Smith, who's the Head of IT, and we also have Kirsty Nutton as well from Finance and Attendance, and Steve Crabtree from Internal Audit.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Item one, apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Shahid, and Councillor Sanford is attending as substitute.
Thank you. Item two, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? If so, please can they raise their virtual hand now?
Can't see any, Chair.
No. Okay, thank you. We'll continue. Item three, minutes of previous meeting. Members, we are asked to agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of September 2020. Please can I have a proposer and seconder? Thank you, Councillor Coles.
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler. If there's any dissent, please can members raise their virtual hand now?
Can't see any, Chair.
Thank you, members. There is no dissent, therefore the minutes are agreed. Item 4, Annual Audit Committee Report. Please can I ask Kirsty Knutson, Pete Carpenter and Ernest and Young to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, Committee. This report presents to Committee the final statement of accounts for the 2019-20 financial year following the external audit and its findings. You'll remember that a draft version of the statement of accounts came to the Committee in July, and at the time we noted that in response to the coronavirus pandemic, government had passed emergency legislation that relaxed the previous shortened timescales, and that a fully audited document was to be signed by the end of November rather than at the end of July. The external audit commenced on the 22nd of June, and over 300 queries have been raised by EY over the period, and over 1,000 pieces of audit evidence has been provided in return. At the time of this meeting, there are still some audit queries that remain outstanding. As you'll see tonight, Neil and Dan from EY, from the Council's external auditors, are here to go through the audit findings, and their report is contained as Appendix 2. They'll also provide an overview of the Redmond review as well. So I'll hand over at this point to Neil.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kirsty. Good afternoon, members of the Audit Committee. I don't know how many of you heard me this morning at the Cabinet meeting, setting out where we currently are on the audit. But if I may, I do want to start with pretty much the same briefing I provided to Cabinet this morning, associated with the most significant item that's impacted on our audit work this year and is contained within the audit results report, which is our response to the difficult financial position the Council's found itself in, obviously before COVID-19 in terms of applying for a capitalisation direction, but more pervasively following COVID-19 and the impact that has had on the Council's financial resilience. So if I may, Councillor Oval, my proposal is that I run through the overall response that we as a firm have undertaken in response to the Council's financial position and where we currently are, which is guiding quite a lot of the commentary in the audit results report. I'll then pause and take any questions.
Okay.
And then I'll come back to go through the remaining aspects of our actual audit of the financial statements. I'm trying to cover this in two parts, given how important the response is to the Council's financial position, if that's agreeable with you, members of the Audit Committee.
Yes, please carry on.
Okay, right. So I've been, I and Dan Cook as the audit manager on the engagement have been undertaking a significant amount of work since the start of the audit to understand the Council's financial position, both pre and post COVID-19. We looked at the arrangements the Council were putting in place to seek and obtain a capitalisation direction from MHCLG prior to the coronavirus pandemic, and we were satisfied with the steps that the Council were taking to alert MHCLG onto its current financial position and what steps have been taken to secure further savings and transformations to enable the Council to secure its medium to longer term financial resilience. Obviously, as members of this committee will know, the impact of the coronavirus pandemic has had a significant and long lasting impact on all local authority finances, but the Council itself has had a significant implication, both associated with lost income, but also additional cost pressures. And throughout the past few months, but particularly more recently on a week-by-week basis, both Dan and myself have been having ongoing liaison with Pete and Kirsty in their respective financial and statutory officer roles to run through the Council's response to its financial position, to understand the future implications on the Council's scenario planning, its risk assessment, forecasts, ongoing loss of income and additional cost pressures, the forecast budget gap, and where the Council proposes it will be in terms of using its available to use reserves, and how close the proximity is to the Council having to declare under Section 114 its inability to set a legal budget. Obviously, those conversations culminated in the Council issuing a letter to MHCLG, as members of this committee should be aware, at the beginning of October, setting out the Council's precarious financial position and the steps that the Council was seeking to address that position, but particularly seeking additional funding support and solutions from central government. As your external auditor, I believe that was the appropriate step for the Council to take, and I believe the Council put in place all the appropriate actions prior to that letter to openly and in a transparent way disclose its financial position, its risks, the options it's exploring, and making that position very clear in the public domain. I say that and emphasise those points because at the point when the council issued its letter to MHCLG, there were various options open to me in terms of our external audit responsibilities. One of which is whether or not the council, whether or not we would issue a public interest report on the council's financial position. And another one is whether we would issue a statutory recommendation asking the council to do something where we saw some gaps in its decision making and analysis. Given the work that we'd undertaken prior to the letter being issued to MHCLG, and in concluding that the council had taken all the appropriate steps, we didn't think it was appropriate or proportionate at that stage to consider a public interest report. Now, a public interest report is drawing to members of the public, taxpayers of Peterborough, items that are of significance in terms of the council's financial matters, governance, decision making that aren't already obvious or in the public domain, or where we have significant concerns on the governance and actions that have been taken either by officers or members in responding to that position. Given that the fact pattern was quite clearly in the public domain, and we were satisfied with the actions that the council were taking to highlight the concerns with MHCLG, we did not think a public interest report was appropriate. A statutory recommendation, it also asks the council to do something where we see there to be significant gaps or flaws in the analysis that's been undertaken to arrive at risks associated with its financial position and the actions that need to be taken. Again, at that particular stage, we didn't think it was appropriate to issue what we call a statutory recommendation, which would have invited the council to have responded in the public domain and in public meetings in response to our audit recommendations, because we felt the council were taking all the appropriate steps at that point. So that's the position up to the MHCL, the letter to MHCLG. Obviously, committee members, we will be well aware that since then the council has been in ongoing dialogue with MHCLG to provide a level of information that would help MHCLG make a final decision on future funding options and what a viable council looks like in the future, which culminates in what's presented to you by the finance officers in terms of the statement of accounts, which is where we come on to next. In terms of auditing what's presented in the financial statements, as at the 31st of March 2020, the council does have a responsibility under accounting standards to prevent a clear, documented disclosure and assessment on its ability to operate as a going concern. And that looks at the council's financial viability, and by viability I mean the current forecast budget gap and available to use reserves, and liquidity, which also looks at the council's available cash, short-term investments and forecast borrowing position. The going concern position looks at least 12 months out from the forecast date of the audit report. So the council have undertaken a documented assessment that looks at its forecast viability and liquidity position to at least the end of December next year, and has also refreshed its medium-term financial plan. So right at the back of the financial statements that you have in your pack today, you'll see a proposed disclosure note that the council have pulled together, which summarises its position on going concern. Now, the SIP for code and under statute still presumes that local authorities will operate as a going concern. For the purposes of accounting standards, our interpretation of that for local authorities is there a material uncertainty associated with the council continuing to provide the current level of services that it provides right now in the foreseeable future? And our view, based on the documented assessment undertaken by management and our stress testing of those assumptions, conclude that there is a material uncertainty associated with the council's current viability, in that if the council doesn't receive additional funding from central government, it does cast a significant doubt on the council being able to provide the current level of services it provides right now for the foreseeable future. Now, because the council have disclosed their position very fairly and openly and in a transparent way in the draft set of accounts, in the updated set of accounts that you have this evening, our view is that that doesn't lead to a qualification of the audit report. What it does lead to is a reference in our audit report to the fact that we agree that there is a material uncertainty associated with the council's viability, and we would support the council's disclosures that are currently contained in the financial statements. The other area that we need to conclude before we issue our audit report is what that means for the council's value for money conclusion. Now, our external audit value for money conclusion looks at the arrangements the council has put in place to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness in its use of resources. And that looks at a number of themes, particularly around governance, risk management, effective decision making, partnership and contract management, but importantly, how the council secures its financial resilience. Now, whilst we're not critical of the arrangements that the council has put in place to try to manage the difficult situation that are in the financial statements, we are.
Neil, can you repeat
we are
the last 30 seconds, because you've gone really out of focus, and we haven't heard anything for about 20 seconds now.
And still not. Neil, if you switch your camera off and just continue verbally, it might help. Nope, we've gone. Dan, what do we do? Do we just
Well, we can have if you want a short pause, we can have that, and I can try and get a hold of, I don't know if Dan can get a hold of Neil.
Yeah, I'll try and get a hold of Neil. The message will definitely be better from Neil, so bear with us.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's now logged out, so hopefully he'll be back in very soon.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
We can hear you now.
Hello. I do apologise for that. My internet must have dropped right in full flow. Should teach me a lesson. I shouldn't talk so much, really. So I'll carry on. I think Pete said he missed 20 seconds. I assume that got to the point where I was talking about the value for money conclusion.
Yes.
Right, okay. So the value for money conclusion considers the council's arrangements for securing economy, efficiency and effectiveness in its use of resources. And that looks at a number of aspects of the council's business: risk management, effective decision making, contract and performance management, and how the council secures its financial resilience. Where we are going through a consultation process at the moment on our value for money conclusion, and I'll come on to the work that we're finishing at the moment, but we will be concluding that given the nature of the council's financial position and how significant and precarious it is, we believe that clearly does have a pervasive impact on how the council can secure effective arrangements to secure its medium to longer term effective use of resources and value for money. So therefore we would be proposing an adverse value for money conclusion in our audit report. In terms of the steps of the additional steps we've taken to reach where we're up to at the moment, so we have had specialists that have supported us to review the council's assumptions. Now, we've done so because we've wanted to test and undertake some stress testing to understand the worst case scenarios associated with the council's forecasts. And where we're up to with that work is that our specialists have concluded that the base forecast that's within the council's budget and medium-term financial strategy is robust and is consistent with economic forecasts and other socio-demographic trends that we're seeing, based on industry and public sector and industry analysis that we're picking up as a firm. But what we've also done is run some modelling on stress testing the council's financial position, considering two worst case scenarios, one of which is the economic recovery and when that takes place and how quickly that might recover during 2021. And also a more protracted economic recovery over the next couple of years, taking account of the implications of extended lockdowns. And we've provided at the end of last week a summary of that financial modelling to the council's finance team, and the final narrative from our work will appear in our an update to our audit results report and also in our annual audit letter. And what we've just sought to do that just to highlight the fact that it remains important that the council continues to undertake appropriate stress testing, scenario testing and forecasting of its financial position, which clearly remains a very fluid situation at the moment given the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. And that will be probably one recommendation that comes out of our audit report. The other area that we're concluding at the moment is just looking at the adequacy of the arrangements the council put in place just prior to the COVID-19 outbreak around putting in place the design, the governance, and how achievable the savings and transformation programs were that were being designed before the COVID-19 outbreak. The reason being is that we want to ensure that the council did all it could prior to the COVID-19 outbreak in terms of securing its financial resilience, and that work will be concluded before the end of November. If there remains any concerns associated with the conclusion of that work and where we think there may be any further gaps in analysis, then that will inform our final reporting. It will form any final recommendations to officers and to members. And clearly, as a firm, we reserve the right to still keep open our options around public interest report and statutory recommendation if anything else arises from the conclusion of our audit work. But at this stage, we don't think that's a necessary step. We're also undertaking regular consultations with our professional practice team on the final audit report. We've been through one round of consultation already on the council's going concern disclosure note and the work that we've undertaken to date, and that's concluded today with no significant matters that I need to make you aware of as a committee. But I'll update probably through the officers and then perhaps through yourself initially, Councillor Over, as the chair of the audit committee, where we get to with the remaining work we undertake before the end of November. Now, I've spent a long introduction going through the council's financial position and our response, but I did want to start there before I turn to the rest of the audit, because this is clearly the most significant matter that's driven the performance of our audit this year and where we are at this point. So I'll pause to take any questions on that, which I hopefully, for those that listened to me this morning at Cabinet, would find that that's a consistent update on what I provided this morning. And clearly I'll be happy to be challenged if I said anything different to what I said this morning. And thereafter, then I'll move on to the rest of the audit results report.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Neil. Nick, Councillor Sanford, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I've actually got two questions. The first one's quite a short one. I'm actually reading page 2 of your auditor's report, where you give like an introduction to it, and I just wanted to ask you about the final phrase in the penultimate paragraph, which says that the financial financial pressures will have a significant and pervasive impact on the authority's ability to secure adequate arrangements for value for money and its use of resources. Now, is that talking about, if the council needs to if the council has to borrow funding, that it won't be seen as a stable financial institution, so might end up paying much higher interest on it? Is that the sort of thing that is referring to?
I mean, in part, that's in Councillor Sandford. That in part that is an implication, clearly, of a council that if it doesn't receive additional funding, may have to explore options of additional borrowing. But I think what's at this heart is that the council is forecasting at this stage that it would run out of its available to use reserves within the foreseeable future, based on current forecasts and its current forecast budget and medium-term plan. With that in mind, that gives the council no stability to be able to make the appropriate decisions to secure longer-term value for money in its use of resources, unless that's reset either through additional funding or through very difficult choices that need to be made around expenditure.
Yeah, okay. The second question was about the paragraph above that, which you've already been talking about. Because I'm not a regular member of this committee, but on the occasions that I've been on the committee, my experience is that that sort of auditors tend to use fairly conservative language. So when you start talking about you're going to be expressing a material uncertainty on the ability of the authority to continue to provide the current levels of service provision, that does give me cause for concern. Now, at the budget scrutiny meeting that we had about 7 days ago, we were looking at the council's projection for next year, which is a budget deficit of £35 million. And there was a couple of us who were asking very similar questions, which was, we were saying, well, what action is being taken to try and reduce this deficit? And the response that we were receiving was that, we're hoping that central government will provide us with the funding. But I then said, well, if they obviously it's fantastic if they do give us all the funding, but if we don't receive it, then what contingency planning is happening? And I was basically told, well, there actually is no contingency planning because we are going to receive it. So are you happy that, given the fact that we may not find out about government funding until possibly January, that that we will, that is there, I appreciate that at political meetings we may not be given a full picture about what's happening, but are you satisfied from your sort of auditing perspective that the council is doing a sufficient amount of contingency planning to deal with sort of any unforeseen circumstances?
So I think the steps the council's taken to date to highlight its concerns to MHCLG and to reflect its current forecasts have been entirely appropriate. I think the council are clear about the steps it needs to take if funding that if it's subject to any funding decision isn't going to sufficiently address the gaps it's forecasting, what implication that might have around the council's legal and statutory responsibilities on setting its budget. Obviously, from the going concern disclosure note, you'll see the limit at which the council is expressing its ability to draw on contingencies, because the forecast is the available to use reserves would diminish very quickly based on current forecasts. And I think whilst I would be supportive of the council putting in place any contingency arrangements that it can, I think there's a more pressing decision on the funding once the council's got clarity on the funding settlement as to whether it can set appropriately a legal budget for the 21-22 financial year and what steps need to be taken if there's a view that that's not going to be possible. And I think that's where my focus is as your external auditor. I think, as I say, all the council's steps to report that, seek a view from MHCLG and engage in that process has all been appropriate. But there is a secondary stage now that's coming, which is, what does the funding settlement say, and what does that mean for Peterborough's finances over the coming year? And the difficulty, Councillor Sanford, is we don't know that position at the point at which these accounts are drawing to a conclusion, which is why the council quite rightly are expressing a material uncertainty in their accounts, and I would agree with that position at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. If I reference, it was at page 30 of the audit results report, there's a paragraph that leads, the Chief Financial Officer has expressed concerns on the fragility of the authority's financial position in the robustness statement presented on the 25th of February 2020, Cabinet supporting the 2020-21 budget. In particular, there is a risk the Chief Financial Officer could trigger the production of a Section 114 report if the authority could not report a balanced budget for 2020-2021, where the capitalisation direction approval is not confirmed by the 31st of March 2020, or a realistic transformation, blah, blah. Anyway, you can read that for yourself. My questions are very, very simple. Number one, how much money do you need from the government to cover yourselves? And B, what work has been done to secure this money, given that we do have a Tory council, a Tory government and Tory MPs in this city? And in your expert opinion, what's the percentage chances of Peterborough City Council having to submit a Section 114 notice? Thank you.
Is that all directed at me? I think the first two might be.
I don't mind. Just
can I take the final question from? Can I take the final question? Based on my experience, I think that was directed at me in terms of my expert opinion. I would say there's clearly a risk, because it's been flagged in our audit report, and it's also been flagged in the council's financial statements. And in terms of the number of councils in my portfolio and the ones that we're dealing with as a firm at the moment, clearly this is one that we're aware of. So is there a likelihood? Well, based on the current position, if no further funding's forthcoming, I think that's something that will be high up our agenda to challenge the officers as to whether that is the next step. But do I think there's going to be more challenge? Like I said to Cabinet this morning, do I think there's going to be more of these in local government? My view is yes. I think there's going to be a lot more challenges facing local government as you get into the 21-22 financial year and beyond. And I would take the view that Peterborough have been very open and transparent about their position at an early stage and sought engagement at the appropriate times to work on a model about what a viable council looks like post COVID-19. That's probably, I hope that answers your third question. No, what were you looking for then?
Well, not being funny, Neil, no offence, this referencing of you talking about a cabinet meeting. Don't forget, most of us were at work today. And secondly, I've just asked you a very simple question. With your expertise, what are the chances of us having to submit a 114 notice? Is it a 60-40? Is it an 80-20? Are we doing really well? Is it a 70-30?
I think I did answer that, and I think I said I can't put a percentage on it. I think I said there's a high chance of that happening if the government doesn't provide further funding in response to the council's request. As the council put in a request to MHCLG back at the beginning of October to explore alternative options to issuing a Section 114 if it didn't receive additional funding. I think that's very clear that if the council doesn't receive additional funding, it may have no other alternative but to issue a Section 114. I can't put a percentage on that. I would say that there is a chance.
Okay, thanks, Neil. We'll move on. We'll ask Peter Carpenter and David Seaton for any comments they may want in a few minutes. But first of all, Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering whether it would be worthwhile for Peter Carpenter to come in, because I know there were a couple of questions that Councillor Fowler had that weren't answered, and maybe he's got the answer first.
So you're happy to become second or third?
By all means. My questions are leading on from what we've already discussed.
Okay, thank you. Peter, would you like to join us?
Yeah, certainly. Just to answer the two questions in particular, in terms of capitalisation direction approval, it was approved before the end of March, and we got 7.2 million, of which just over 6 million is in these accounts for 1920, and we're using another 1.2 million for this year. And as Neil has pointed out, this is the reason why we and the vast majority of the rest of local government are now in a process of talking to central government to understand what the settlement's going to be. We have had funding for this financial year in terms of COVID. We are now 88% funded. We have 38 million pounds worth of costs, and we've received all but 4.6 million pounds of that in various grants. However, there is no money at the moment that the government has looked at for next year. This is why we wrote to MHCLG on the 9th of October, when they said you can start talking to us about the next financial year to actually look at ways of addressing the issues in the short term, especially because, of course, there is a different funding settlement a year on and a different set of criteria where local government are going to be funded to get us to that point. And those discussions are happening with us at the moment. A big issue for the whole sector is the fact that the later the settlement is, there's always going to be a gap. Whatever we get, we don't know what that gap is. And so we've got to make some planning assumptions based on something we're not going to know till quite late.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Coles.
Thanks very much, Chair. Neil, I was looking at, 5 days ago, there's a report on Croydon Council where their auditors, Grant Thornton, said there'd been a collective corporate blindness to both the seriousness of the financial position and the urgency with which actions needed to be taken. Obviously not a Conservative-run council, but irrelevant of the political aspects of this. You've got a very wide experience, expert experience of a whole number of councils around the country. My two questions for you are, obviously you're also talking with MHCLG as well, because clearly they're very much involved in this. Do you have any take on MHCLG's view about how we've approached this, whether it's been both useful and appropriate way to try and deal with the obvious financial issues we're all facing? And the second one is, I think I ask questions of the auditor every year, which is, I know you can't give us a league table, but do you think of those clients that you do deal with, that we are in a healthier position than many, in that we, despite having this budget deficit, we are at least very clear about where it is and that we'll be making proactive efforts to deal with it? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Coles, yes. So I've, like everyone, like all of you, I read with interest Grant Thornton's public interest report on Croydon, and what became clear from what I read is that obviously they've had further implications from the COVID-19 pandemic, but they've had financial difficulties for quite some time, and there's been challenges around financial governance, the action that's been taken, your reference to institutional recognition of the issue, blindness to the difficulties. Now I contrast that with the engagement I've had for the past year with the officers at Peterborough City Council, and I would say there is a clear recognition of the council's financial position, an open and transparent approach. There's been clear integrity with that position. One test I have to take with a public interest report is to say, do I think the appropriate steps have been taken, and are there significant gaps? But equally, has this been flushed out appropriately in the public domain and with the relevant key stakeholders? I think you can say consistently for some months that is definitely the case with Peterborough. So in my engagement with MHCLG and with the council, I believe the council's taken all the appropriate steps in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. SIPVA, who are the professional body and the institute that guide preparation of the accounts, but also provide guidance to the likes of Pete in his role as the statutory financial officer, made very clear modifications to the guidance associated with Section 114 notices. and did give a very clear set of guidance to chief financial officers that they should write to MHCLG and engage in MHCLG at the earliest possible opportunity to explore alternatives to a Section 114 notice. Now, in my dialogue with the council, I believe that they exercised that position at the appropriate point in their letter to MHCLG at the beginning of October. And if you cut me to the chase, had the council not done that, I think I would have seriously considered issuing a public interest report or a statutory recommendation, because that would have been the point at which I would have believed the council were not acting appropriately, and I believe they should have done something. The fact that the council did meant that I didn't need to do that. Now, in terms of league tables, I think the council are one of the most open and transparent councils that I've come across, and this has been a very, very difficult set of circumstances for the last year. But I think at every stage the council have acted appropriately and have always sought to do the right thing. But no one's without any doubt that this is a very difficult set of financial circumstances that the council's facing. And as your auditor, I need to think equally about how I report that, in what manner I report that, and express a balanced position on where the council is. It's very easy for me to suddenly trot out a public interest report, but I need to recognise the steps that the council has taken and make sure that what I'm saying is meaningful and adds further recommendations to things that the council could do now and going forward.
Thanks very much, Neil. I mean, I think it was in June we saw a lot of reports about nearly 8 out of 10 councils being unable really to be able to guarantee a balanced budget. So it's extraordinary times that we're all living through at the moment, and the pandemic, I think, is...
Okay, thanks, Councillor Coles. Councillor Jones next, and then last one before Neil carries on, Councillor Seaton. So Councillor Jones first, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It really is to go on from what Councillor Coles was saying in a way, in the sense of I like context and some kind of benchmarks. And to be fair, Councillor Seaton said last week that without funding, if we hadn't taken the steps that we do, then, you know, we'd be heading for a much darker place than we are now. And I think for me, it comes up is going forward, you know, we're doing, I'm not doubting in many ways that everybody's doing the best they can in completely circumstances that are beyond anyone in living memory. But is there anything, I mean, for instance, Peterborough's circumstances are hopefully quite different from Croydon's, and different from Northampton, and different from Nottingham. We're all teetering on the brink potentially of an S114. So it really is just the particular circumstances of a council and its own issues that it faces. And I think that's what I'd like to see going forward, if it's possible, is just to make sure that not just what we're doing, but looking at it in a wider context, to make sure that we're not going to fall foul of it, and with the help of our auditors, Ernst & Young, in this particular instance. So it's more a plea rather than a question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I know it's not a question, but all I would say is that the reason why I brought specialists involved this year is that we do have a team of resources in EY that spend a lot of their time doing financial resilience assessments for organisations that we don't audit, and I've brought those all individuals into my team this year to support me to form a very considered and detailed view on the council's financial position. Now, you haven't yet seen the output of that work. There is a draft currently with officers at the end of last week, but what I'm presenting is the base case, which is in your budget, but equally what I think might be worst case scenarios, depending about how long this goes on for, the prospects on economic recovery, how long the recession is going to last for, and all of those sorts. Now, so what I said to Cabinet this morning, I'll say again here, is that the council will be wise just to continue to keep its stress testing and scenario planning up to date to reflect those current trends, because it can move very, very quickly.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Seaton, your hand's been going on and off for the last 5 minutes. Do you want to say anything before Neil carries on?
A couple of times, Councillor Over. Yes, Chair, thank you. I think there's 3 points I just want to touch on. Councillor Sanford said, and I think he was probably referring to me at scrutiny last week, that I'd said, the government's got to provide us with funding and there's no contingency planning. And a slightly obtuse approach to what I said. We need to understand what the settlement will be that comes out at the end of this year, and what options the government are happy to agree to with us, to understand then the size of the issue we have to address in phase 2 of the budget. So I think that's the point I was making. We need to get down to the nitty-gritty of what does the council have to find and how will the government help us. The second one is that the Croydon Nottingham thing is quite interesting, because Croydon, forget COVID, right? If COVID hadn't happened, Croydon still had a major problem. And Nottingham's public interest statement was because it had lost £24 million on an energy company. Forget COVID, it was a very specific issue. I think when it comes to COVID, as has points been made, the vast majority of councils have got a problem. There was a suggestion the other day that 80% of counties and unitaries next year won't be able to balance the budget. I'd just like to ask a question though of Neil. This came up at Cabinet this morning. Has there been, in your view, Neil, any financial mismanagement by Peterborough City Council? Thank you, Chair.
So in answer to that question, and as I said at Cabinet this morning, I do not have any evidence of financial mismanagement from officers of the council. As I've said, I think the council have taken all the appropriate steps at every stage of the audit to address the financial difficulties that they face. I think the one area of work that we're finishing at the moment is looking at the savings and transformation plans that were put in place prior to the coronavirus pandemic. And I said this morning, and I repeat here, that clearly when that work's concluded, if that reveals any gaps in either arrangements or decision making, that means I might have to go back and reconsider that view. I will do, but I don't have anything that's come to my attention to date.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Neil, would you like to carry on with your second part?
Okay, well, hopefully this will be much shorter, but I just want to remind members that we also have to audit a number of critical judgments and complex areas in the council's financial statements, and the audit results report provides details on our response to those areas where we identified significant audit risks and inherent audit risks that were driving our audit work on the financial statements. Now, those would have been based on circumstances and conditions prior to COVID-19. There have been a couple of areas post COVID-19 that have driven our work on the audit of the financial statements. The first, I would say, is to do with the council's valuation of its assets, other land and buildings in particular, and the engagement we have with our real estates team to review the valuer's assumptions. Valuers are expressing a material uncertainty associated with asset valuations as at the balance sheet date. Now, that's been expressed by all of the valuers on audits that I've come into contact with this year. So the question, I think, from an audit point of view is, what is the impact on a material uncertainty on asset valuations for Peterborough City Council's asset base, given that you don't have the same exposure to commercial investments and commercial property as perhaps other local authorities, and less susceptible to market volatility. We're concluding our view on that material uncertainty disclosure, and any impact on our audit reporting is likely to be an emphasis of matter in our audit report. So the council's already drawn attention in the accounts to a disclosure of a material uncertainty by your valuer. If we think that's a significant enough disclosure, we provide what's called an emphasis of matter in our audit report that draws attention to that disclosure. It is not a qualification to the audit opinion. The reason why we think that might be appropriate is looking at the nature of your asset base and the ongoing funding that's needed in terms of maintaining those assets. So that's one area. The other area is on the council's the asset valuations in the pension fund. Again, that's driven by market volatility, particularly valuations of assets that are driven by harder to value assets, so pooled property funds, for example, that are contained in the pension fund. Now, we have a programme of work where we ask of the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund auditors, and we've received a assurance letter back from the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund auditors, and there are no significant matters I need to make you aware of associated with our work on the net pension liability that's disclosed in the council's financial statements. But there is a correction I want to make in the audit results report. There was a difference noted between the pension fund accounts and the actuarial schedule of results that the council received from its actuary on the investment asset valuations, and that difference is 2.56 million. It does indicate in the audit results report that the council has amended the accounts for that item. The council has chosen not to amend for that item. It's not material. It doesn't have an impact on the council's general fund position and working balances, but I think it's important to correct in terms of this audit committee the fact that this is an unadjusted difference, and when the audit is concluded, it will need a reference in the letter of representation from management and audit committee as to the reasons why that has not been amended. Other areas to draw out in terms of impact of COVID-19 is the recoverability of your debtors. Part of that was an area of focus because of a long-standing debt with the CCG, but equally we also looked a bit more quizzically at recoverability of debtors in light of COVID-19 and have no matters to draw to your attention. We've also considered the council's operating environment, as you would expect post-COVID-19, with remote working and the effectiveness of internal controls, quality of work papers and evidence provided in response to audit, which drives our procedures. And again, we're not drawing attention to any significant weaknesses that we've seen in internal control. And we have undertaken group audit work for the first time because of Live Peterborough Limited, and we've had scoping work agreed with the auditors of the limited company, who are also EY, and we'll have group reporting conducted before we issue our audit opinion. I suppose the only other main area really to draw to your attention before I move on to finally on to audit fees, it's just the work that we all need to collectively undertake between now and the 30th of November. There's still a lot of work to be done by both the officers and us as the external auditors. Quite a significant amount still of review procedures to undertake on the audit file. As Kirsty noted in her introduction, there are still some queries that are left with the officers to respond to. We've still got to conclude a range of professional practice consultations, which are on our response to the council's financial position, of which I've just gone through in detail beforehand. So I think it would be remiss of me not to say at this meeting that I think that we're all working as hard as we can to hit the 30th of November date, but to safeguard audit quality and our respective professional standards, I think it would be honest of me to say at the date of this meeting that does remain a risk, just because we need to get through all of that together and do the right thing. And if it becomes likely that we may not be able to make that date, there are provisions in the audit and accounts and audit regulations for the council to publish a notice should it not be able to publish the audited accounts by the 30th of November. But suffice to say, we're all making all the strides possible to hit that date if we can. But I just want to flag with you that there is a lot still to be done collectively. And finally, at the end of the report, you'll see references to audit fees. Now, I've rehearsed this with this audit committee and with officers throughout the course of the year. So hopefully the figure of a 77,000 increase to the baseline fee should be one that's recognised to members of this audit committee as we went through that earlier on this year. What we've also reflected in here is additional work that we've had to undertake in response to additional work post-COVID-19 around key critical accounting judgments, involvement specialists. And I suppose our experience this year at auditing to a lower materiality, which again has been driven by your current financial condition. So you will see that we're anticipating our final fee in terms of increase may be higher than the 77,000 that's indicated in the audit results report, and more nearer to just over 102,000. And we've provided a breakdown of of that in the audit results report and the factors driving the professional and regulatory context of our work. Ultimately, it's for PSAA to determine the final fee variation, but for the purposes of being open and transparent with officers in this audit committee, we wanted to make you aware of those additional costs and the process that we will be going through from here on in. And finally, Kirsty, a couple of final things. Kirsty did mention the Redmond report. I won't go through that in detail. There are two slides two pages in our audit results report that summarise our perspective on the Tony Redmond review, which looked into holistically the sustainability of financial reporting and external auditing in England, and proposed wide-ranging reforms to the regulation of that work, to the future scope of auditors' work, proposals for introduction of summarised accounts. At EY, we broadly welcome the recommendations from the Tony Redmond review, and we'll continue to work with the relevant stakeholders on how swiftly those recommendations can be implemented. And to close, I just want to finish from where I started, which is a very big thank you to the officers of the Council for all the cooperation and assistance that Dan, I and our team have had throughout the course of the audit in what can only be described as a very unprecedented set of circumstances and challenges facing everybody this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. Now, there are no blue hands that I can see. We're okay, aren't we, Dan? No questions. So I'll say thank you, members. There are no questions. Therefore, I'd like to move to the recommendations on page 11. These are: 1, receive and approve the audit results report for the year ended 31st of March 2020 from Ernst & Young, the Council's external auditors. 2, receive and approve the draft 2019-20 management representation letter. 3, receive and approve the audited statement of accounts 2019-20. To delegate to the chairman to approve further changes if needed before the deadline of the 30th of November 2020. 5, sorry.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly, Councillor Farrell.
Thanks, Chair. That point there, reference to delegate to the chairman to approve further changes if needed before the deadline of the 30th of November. What's that all about then?
It's happened to me about twice now where there's been a slight alteration, but Pete will be able to tell you in a little bit more detail.
Certainly, Chair. Councillor Power, it's if there are any final changes to the accounts or any of the statements that we sign, both myself and the Chair need to sign that off, because we do an audit, a letter as part of the thing back to the auditors. And so we need to sign everything off properly, but it's gone through the right process.
Okay, thank you. Where are we? 5, to note the recommendations and conclusions of the independent review of local authority financial reporting and external audit by Sir Tony Redmond. If you are not members, if you are not in agreement, please can you raise your virtual hands now? Members, thank you. Thank you. The recommendations are therefore agreed. Item 5, internal audit, mid-year progress report. Please can I ask the Chief Internal Auditor to introduce the report?
Mr. Chairman, I've got to leave at this point, unfortunately. Apologies for that.
Okay, Councillor Sanford, we'll miss you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm afraid I have to go to the same meeting as Councillor Sanford, so again, apologies for the rest of the meeting.
Okay, have fun, Fiona.
I'm off then as well. See you later.
You really don't want to go to the same meeting, Councillor Power, I promise you.
Okay, Steve, it's just going to be us as two and 1 or 2 others by the sounds of it. Everybody's off to group reps or group leaders.
Thank you very much, Chair. The report in front of you is a progress report up until the end of September. It sets out the progress which the internal audit team has made to date in delivering the audit plan for the council. The council provides services to the public from finite resources, and internal audit has a key role in looking at the key risks which impact on the council meeting those services. Our audit plan is developed to look at those risks and focus on those areas. It's built from our knowledge of the organisation, discussions and feedback with chief officers and heads of service, and finally agreement by committee. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, our audit plan was deferred from the March committee to July's, and this has actually allowed us to refocus our audit plans to take into account all of the changes that are impacting on the council and provide a more up-to-date plan for officers, for members and the committee. The report and associated appendices set out the progress so far, and it focuses on a number of key areas. It identifies the resources which we have within internal audit to deliver the service, the audits we've completed so far, the outcomes of those, or any of those which are still in progress. And where we have actually identified areas of concern, those reports of limited or no assurance are provided for members in the form of the executive summary. There are 2 of those on the agenda tonight, and we have Sam Smith in attendance from the ICT team, who will give you an update in relation to ICT asset management. So using the 3 appendices which are in our committee report, the first one is the progress report and is on pages 227 through to 233. Our initial focus, I've already stated, was to suspend what was planned as our audit works and focus on the pandemic. So we looked closer at the works which were going on in departments, the changes that were taking place there, and provide support in a number of areas, as well as also we were focusing on the external organisations we were dealing with, and in particular grant claims which comes into the council and they have predetermined dates within deadlines which need to be completed. Officers within audit have provided support inside and alongside works for the hub. We have 1 full-time officer who has been seconded to the coordination hub since May, and they're currently still working there. There have been a host of financial support measures which have come out from central government, for example, all the business grants, and internal audit have been involved in that, looking at the processes for those, monitoring on those, and in particular been looking at the fraudulent claims going forward. I'm not saying there aren't any fraudulent claims. What we've been doing is collecting all the data, bringing it through various data matching exercises which have been provided for us, and then we're looking into the state of those companies to make sure the payments were legitimate. Going forward, one of the things which we make reference to in our progress report, we used to provide the audit service for the combined authority, and that's ceased in September 2020. Similarly, we used to do work for Vivacity as their client. With it returning to the combined authority, we're looking to develop that going forward as part of Peterborough Limited. As I've already mentioned, we have 1 officer who is in the hub at the present moment in time. We also have another full-time member of staff who has successfully been recruited to another organisation, and they left us at the end of October. With us being 2 full-time posts down, we are looking to recruit so we can actually backfill to complete the audit plan. On page 232, we show the outputs to date, and despite the reduced resources and being able to refocus, the team has been able to deliver almost to expectations. Obviously, now that we're now going to refocus our attentions back into the works of the audit plan to take that forward. On pages 234 to 243, we set out all the various items which we've concluded and completed so far. So the first 2 pages look at the governance and anti-fraud activities which we've undertaken. Those are areas which look to support you as a committee, as well as to support the organisation. So we undertake things there such as supporting the Risk Management Board, and also the works of the National Fraud Initiative, which we've had previous reports on. The next one for National Fraud Initiative has happened now, so we've submitted all the data sets for 2020. We expect the data back in January and February, so we can start investigating any errors there. On page 236, we set some time aside for consultancy and management requests, and the number of activities have actually taken place there, and they're there for your information, and I'm quite happy to take questions on those. Page 237 focuses on the grants, which is a key area of work which needs to be delivered because all the funds come in and need to be verified. Otherwise, potentially the payment could be withheld. On pages 238, there are a number of jobs which we've deferred so far. And then going forward, there are all the future audit activities which we've undertaken so far. A lot of them are COVID, because we've annotated those with an asterisk for information. And also there are obviously some audit works. One of those audit works in there relates to teachers' pensions, which we've identified as a limited assurance, where there was a number of checks there which are all relating to data and an inability for us to verify that payments were correct. Payroll are checking that documentation as we speak to go through those, and as I understand at the present moment in time, 25% of those records have been completed so far. The other limited assurance one is the IT asset management one, and as I already mentioned, we have Sam Smith here who will give you a progress report on the issues which we identified on those. If you prefer, Chair, I'll hand you over now to Sam to give you up a date on that particular audit, and then I'll take questions afterwards on anything else within the context of the reports.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks, Steve. Sam, all yours.
Good evening, Chair. So the audit report was undertaken when IT was part of the Serco managed contract, and that has now come in-house as of the 1st of October. Of the audit findings, there were 11 in total. 6 of those have been completed and 5 are in progress against a date of the end of the financial year. Most of those we're comfortable with the progress against them. There's one that has been more problematic, and does require some further work. The items that haven't been completed yet are items 1, 4, 6, 8, and 11. The item 1 is the IT asset strategy, and there are plans in place for the long term of that in terms of the new technology that will be used, and there are short-term options being looked at as well to make sure that we can maintain that information appropriately. Item 4, we are currently in the process of reviewing the life cycle for laptops and phones to ensure that they remain fit for purpose and also affordable against the council budget. Item 6 is in progress, and that will be updated in time for the end of the financial year. Item 8 is the area that has been found to be problematic, in that item relates to assets that are removed from the offices, and particularly during the COVID pandemic. Although there is a form to log those items, it hasn't been possible for IT to be aware of all of those. In item 11, that relates to the same strategy as in item 1, and that we are using the technology to create a way to show staff the assets that are attributed to them, and also to show that for managers. So we will end up with a fairly robust view of where assets are, with the exception of those that have been removed from the offices.
Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Coles.
Chair, thank you very much, and Sam, thank you very much for update on ICT. It's the area that I've got some interest in. Obviously, there's been some slippage in terms of maintaining the asset management while the service has been split between Serco and Council, but now that's come back in-house, we can now get on top of that. My concern rather is about the future, with the potential of more and more external working. Do you think that there might be a requirement for a fairly substantial overhaul of the assets to facilitate more easily home working and mobile working? And is that potentially going to be an issue for the future of the council? Thank you.
I think in terms of the overall IT strategy, we are looking at that provision, at what is provided as opposed to how it's managed. So in terms of the IT asset management, we're absolutely looking to see how we can utilise technology to make sure that it's controlled appropriately. But as part of the IT strategy, we're looking to make sure that the devices and the software and everything else that is provided is fit for purpose. So that is something that's absolutely being considered, and technology changes at a fairly fast rate, and we do need to make sure that people can take advantage of that. So there is a current project to review the laptop provision for staff, for example, And we're also looking at the mobile phone software, the software that controls the phone. So we're there from, if it's of interest, we're moving to using Intune to manage the mobile phones, and that will provide a greater level of access and more features and functionality. So I think that on splitting it into IT asset management, we're absolutely on top of that now that the services come in-house, and from a strategy point of view in terms of the quality of the provision, we're progressing that also.
Thank you very much. My response, I suppose, would be we have seen moving from Windows to Chrome and then back again. And while we have managed to save money overall, I think IT is one of those areas where you can think of a number and then treble it, and then you haven't quite got enough money for the plan that you might have to find the money for in a year or so. So it's one of the more difficult areas to manage. But are you content that we have a way forward that will be affordable, or are we going to see, because of the current financial situation, the possibility that we're going to have to live with what we have?
I think we need to make sure that we can provide what the council needs within its budgets, and that's one of the reasons we're looking very carefully at the refresh cycle. So you can spend less on devices, but they have a shorter refresh cycle, or you can spend more and they have a longer refresh cycle. And somewhere in the middle of that, there will be what the council can afford that also suits their purposes. But it is an ongoing balance.
Thank you, Councillor Farr.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick question there, because Sam mentioned about the handing back, or staff handing back laptops. I just wondered if we could seek some more clarity on that in regards to what that's actually about.
My apologies. It wasn't about staff handing back laptops. It was more when the COVID-19 hit. There were assets that were taken home. I did screens, mice, keyboards. And it's those peripherals in the main that were more difficult to keep track of. So most staff at that point had a laptop or a Chromebook device, and that's attributable to them directly. We do need to go through the process to make sure that we have that information up to date. But it was the items that were on desks that we found more problematic in terms of being able to track. And
if I can just ask one quick question, Chair.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sam, are you aware of any shortages anywhere within the council? I'm thinking maybe social care.
I'm not aware of any. I think there is a balance between making sure that equipment is available in the offices for those people that still work there, and also available for people working at home. I'm not aware of any shortages, but that's something that we could advise on. I haven't been made aware of any.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Sam, thanks for that. All I'd like to ask is that now that we're bringing things in-house, I noticed when we had the joint scrutiny of the budget, the numbers go down over the next 2 or 3 years. Have we got an asset management strategy in place now it is in-house? And is it wise to have the budget going down if we're not quite sure what the refresh cycle is going to be like? I like that phrase. I just wondered, is it a bit of a punt at this stage? And might that figure have to change based on what you've found so far?
That work is still ongoing. So in terms of the audit requirement, that IT asset strategy is still being developed. So I would need to come back to you at a later date with more kind of defined information. Clearly, the immediate requirement was to make sure that we've got measures in place to control stock and identify strong asset management procedures. But that strategic view is the one that we are still working on at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Back to you, I think now.
Thank you, Chair. So if there's any questions about any other aspects of the audit report?
No. We're clear, are we, Dan?
No.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, members. There are no more questions. Therefore, I'd like to move to the recommendations on page 223. These are to note the progress of the internal audit plan for 2020-2021. Members, if you are not in agreement, please can you raise your virtual hand now?
None, Chair.
Thank you. Members, thank you for the recommendations. Sorry, thank you. The recommendations are therefore agreed. We're on now to item 6, Treasury Management Strategy. Please can I ask the Acting Corporate Director, Resources, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to hand over to Kirsty.
Right.
Thank you both. Thank you. This report provides a mid-year review of the performance of the prudential indicators. The Prudential Code underpins a system of capital financing, and the prudential indicators are developed as part of the medium-term financial strategy. The indicators help members overview and confirm the capital programme, and performance against these indicators is detailed in Appendix A of the report. With current performance, there are no indicators to draw your attention to. However, the forecast position for Indicator 4 does show that the underborrowed position is forecast to reduce by the end of the year, which means the actual amount of debt externally borrowed is expected to be closer to the capital financing requirement. The chart within the report shows that to date, the Council has been able to reduce its debt by 23 million through the timings of additional grants and funding of COVID-19 activities. However, based on the current capital expenditure forecast, borrowing is anticipated to be 551 million by the end of the financial year. And this position is regularly monitored as part of the monthly budgetary control reporting cycle. It's quite brief from me, and I'll stop here in case Pete would like to add anything else. Otherwise, I'll open it up for questions.
No, nothing from Pete. Okay, we'll open this to questions. Have we any questions? Councillor Fowler, please.
Thanks, Chair. The thing that caught my ear there was the £550 million over the next year. That just seems quite significant. How do we compare against other authorities?
So in terms of how we compare to other authorities, I think our debt levels are slightly higher, but roughly we are substantially lower than others. So if you read the Croydon report, they've just invested and have got debt of 1.5 billion, which they've done in the last 3 years. Spellform, £1 billion. We've only invested, and significant amounts of our investment are in schools and highways. That's where the vast majority of our money is. We have got very, very little in commercial activities, Councillor Fowler.
So you mentioned there about highways. So what's the percentage of that figure in regards to highways?
I'll have to come back to you for an actual amount, but my guesstimate is probably around 30 to 40%.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Seaton.
The actual figure.
So, Councillor Seaton, did you want to speak or not?
Yeah, I was just going to add a point there. We have to remember that a lot of our capital investment is linked into the fact that we've been a major growth city in the UK. With being a growth city comes that investment in schools and that investment in road infrastructure to support housing. So, that is one of the reasons we're probably above average for the level of borrowing. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we're open to questions for Steve, if there are any. I don't see any. We're okay, Dan?
Yeah, no more questions.
Thank you. Thank you, members. There are no more questions. Therefore, I'd like to move to the recommendations on page 249. These are to review current performance against the prudential indicators as approved in the Treasury management strategy contained in the medium-term financial strategy. Members, if you are not in agreement, please can you raise your virtual hand now?
No hands, Chair.
Thank you, Dan. Members, thank you. The recommendations are therefore agreed. Item 7, use of consultants. Please, can I ask the Acting Corporate Director Resources to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. This report comes to every meeting, although it didn't come to the last one because it was the first meeting after our lockdown and we had rather a packed agenda. Overall, for the first 6 months of the year, consultancy spend was 0.9 million, projecting a full year total of 1.8 million. This is about £1 million lower than the average over the last few years. Agency spend for the same 6 month period is 1.7 million, which projects up to 3.4 million, over 3.4 to 3.5 million for a full year. This compares to last year and the average for the last couple of years of over £6 million. This is a significant decrease in both sides. We've also, as part of a process over the last year or so, especially in Wendy's area in People and Communities, been very successful at converting temporary agency posts to permanent. And in fact, if you look at our overall agency percentage at the moment, it's around 11 or 12%. That compares to national averages at the moment in social care in particular, about 23, 24%. Table in 4.7 sets out how we've done over the last 2 to 3 years in terms of reducing spend on employees and agency and consultancy. If you take it over the last 2 years, for the first 6 months of the year, we've reduced costs in these areas by 2.7 million. Obviously, that projects up to almost a £5 million savings in a full year. It's going in the right direction. I do have to note that at present time that obviously the Manor Drive Solution program for our business support, which is done through Serco, isn't part of these numbers. Now, we were meant to reduce that number by 1.2 million in this financial year as part of the MTFS. That hasn't happened because those staff were redirected to COVID related activities. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? Dan, are we okay?
Councillor Fowler.
Oh yes, Councillor Fowler. Sorry. Have we got? Sorry, I've got that messed up. I didn't expect the questions then. Councillor Coles first of all, then Councillor Joseph, and then Councillor Fowler.
I think, Chair, that Councillor Fowler was first. I'm trying to follow the rules as possible.
No, age before beauty. Age before beauty.
The blue hands went up and down and on and off, and it finally settled on yourself, Councillor Coles, as the first person. So we'll go Councillor Coles, Councillor Joseph, Councillor Fowler, as it is on the screen at the moment.
I'm grateful, Chair. Thank you very much. Peter, the interest I have is in the reduction in temporary staff and agency staff. And it strikes me that when I was lead member for Children's Services, we had, I think, 23 or 24% of our social workers who were agency. And I think you were saying that social care has been one of the significant savings here. Is it the case that we are able to transfer our agency staff into permanent positions, and that's been part of the success here?
Councillor Coles, yeah, that is the case. We roughly, for a social worker, save about 20k for each one we convert temporary to permanent. We're in discussions with other agency firms, obviously, in terms of looking at agency contracts, and it's quite apparent that we've managed to really reduce our agency spend when others haven't. Not quite sure of the factors why, if I'm honest. But, you know, I think an underlying factor is going to be the COVID emergency and the fact that people are far more comfortable with full-time jobs at the moment than they are with temporary agency.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Joseph, please.
Thank you, Chair. I guess Pete's answered a little bit of my question. I was going to ask how much of these savings have been achieved through are due to COVID, and in particular the spend on consultants. What do you project that the figures for consultants will be in 2021-22, and how many of these savings have been achieved through redundancy and staff reductions?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Joseph. In terms of the three questions, number one, how much do I think consultancy is going to be next year? Well, if I look at the list, there's a couple of items on there that won't be there next year to start with. So you've got Serco ICT project support, or those staff, or a lot of the facility for those staff are actually TUPID in-house for the service that Sam's now running as of October. And obviously you've still got the final bit of the Grant Thornton numbers on there. We're always going to have a certain amount of things in terms of consultancy for what you need, for things we don't actually carry. But I would suggest that it's probably going to be £300,000 or £400,000 at least less than this year. In terms of Sorry, can you go over the other question again? I've totally lost it. Apologies, Councillor Joseph.
How much of the savings are due to COVID, and how much of the savings have been achieved through redundancy and staff reductions?
Okay, in terms of COVID, I'm not totally sure, but I think in overall terms, we've had a move, and I think we're up in the high teens last year in terms of our agency, and we've come down, but it's a mix of both. What we've also done is, I think as we've said in the budget report this year, but went out in October, we had about 5 positions that were being made redundant, and actually I don't think we had a single redundancy from those 5 positions, because some of them were empty and others we had staff redeployed. If I look at last year, we did have the voluntary redundancy program, which I think was around the 30-person mark, but again, these were people that would have been, we asked for voluntary redundancy to move savings plans forward, and that enabled us to actually generate more savings. So not significantly. We do or I look at agency on a weekly basis, and I still think we still have a number of unfilled positions across the authority, which obviously we're looking at. Some of them may need to be filled, others because we've actually got people redeployed to other things.
Thank you. Councillor Fowler now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Having looked at the report, it's pretty clear that, well, you've thrown tens of millions of pounds at consultants over the last 10 years, but now at a time when we are in an unprecedented period of our history, and one might suggest we need experts more than ever to help us out of a possible fiasco. I'm just wondering, why has this council reduced its spend significantly on BODs previously described by this administration as essential to efficiency?
I think, Councillor Fowler, there's a very simple answer to that one, actually. When it comes to delivering our services, we are the experts. And for the stuff we've had to do for COVID and the local government response, it's local government that are the experts, and actually people are learning from us at the moment. That could change in the future, because as we know, consultancy firms are always very quick to pick up on what other people do. But we, and even the Treasury has remarked how good local government has done as a sector in delivering this.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of making use of the local situation, but Pete, do you expect this spend to continue to decline, or are you thinking maybe, especially between now and next year, we could see a significant increase?
I can't see a significant increase over the next year. The only significant thing we would need consultancy for is implementing next year's budget, and a lot of that will be delivered by the program teams, and a lot of it is IT based and IT generated, and a lot of that resource which we paid externally for in the past is now tubered across internally. So I can't see it being as high as it's been in previous years, unless something comes out of the blue where we have no expertise at all in. Then of course it's the first thing we'd do, because obviously in those cases it actually saves us money to do it.
Just one quick question, if that's all right, Chair.
Yes, fine.
So we've learned this evening about the importance of getting some money off central government at the end of the year. Are you planning on using consultants for that particular escapade?
No, they're only talking to us.
Okay, on to Councillor Jones now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question for you, Pete. You said savings of 20k on temp to perm. Does that include the agency fees? And how often do we go out to the market to check the fees to see how competitive they are?
Thank you, Councillor Jones. We're actually coming to the end of the contract at the moment. So at the moment, we're looking at a new contract. New contracts come up in March next year. At the moment, all the contracts we're on were tendered out, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. And so we were in a competitive process when we did that.
And sorry, and do the savings include the agency fees? Is that inclusive of that 20k? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Correct.
Thank you, lovely. Councillor Seaton now, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was involved with the original review of consultants, and I actually was the person who proposed that we bring this consultants report to every meeting of Audit Committee. So we're absolutely open about the amount we're spending on consultants and the services they're providing. So when Councillor Fowler says we've thrown money at consultants, we do just have to remember that every single pound of that has been put before this committee, and I can hardly remember an occasion where any member of this committee has challenged any element of that expenditure. Now, I'd add a further point. If any member of this committee wants to challenge any of that expenditure, I want someone to come along and explain exactly why it was incurred. I've made this point before. I'm very happy to organise that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. In fact, I've got to admit, I do remember the use of consultants being challenged in the past, but I've been on the council for so long, we probably did it in Latin, so nobody remembers it. Okay, we'll go on to the next bit. Thanks, members. There are no more questions. Therefore, I'd like to move to the recommendations on page 257. These are that Audit Committee consider the update report on the use of consultants for the financial year 2019-20 and for the first 6 months of 2020 and 21. Members, if you are not in agreement, please can you raise your virtual hand now? Okay, Dan?
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Lovely. Members, thank you for the recommendations. Therefore agreed. Items 8 and 9, members to note, there is nothing to report on these items at this meeting. Item 10, feedback report. Please can I ask the Senior Democratic Services Officer to introduce the report. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is just for members to note the feedback of any items that came out of the last meeting. And that's all it is, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Members, if you have any questions, please can you raise your blue virtual hand and Dan will notify me of any members that wish to ask a question. Pete.
Yeah, in terms of the one that I had as an action to, there is no meaningful list that I can get across all councils of consultants spend.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Dan, are we clear?
I can't see any more, Chair.
Right, okay, thank you. Thank you, members. There are no more questions. Therefore, I'd like to move on to the recommendations on page 265. These are to note the report. Members, if you are not in agreement, please can you raise your virtual hand now?
Sorry, please excuse me, Chair. I did miss this just before we go on. There was something for Steve Crabtree about obtaining the details, and it's got ongoing against it. I'm not disagreeing that it is ongoing. Can Steve give me an idea about when it was me who raised this about the single person's allowance? So I don't know what ongoing means. Other than that, I'm happy with the rest.
Thank you, Councillor. The bit that's ongoing, I've chased the department for the response, and as at the 5th of November, I hadn't had a response. So it's not completed, it's ongoing. We're still waiting for the answer. So that's why it's used that word as ongoing.
Okay, thank you. If there's anybody not in agreement, can you raise your virtual hand now? I can't see any. No, Dan. Right, thanks. Members, thank you. The recommendations are therefore agreed. Item 11, work programme. please can I ask the Senior Democratic Services Officer to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, this is the item for members, just to note the items coming up at the future meetings, and for members to raise any items that they may wish to include on the work programme, Chair.
Councillor Fowler.
I haven't spoken for a few minutes, so I thought I'd jump in. Thanks, Chair. Do we need to identify the impact of Brexit at all on People City Council? I remember Pete told me some great stories at previous committees about things like headed paper and all that sort of thing, but it was quite big money. I don't know whether that's relevant.
I don't know. I'm looking for guidance for somebody who's going to answer that.
Steve was nodding his head there. Steve Crabtree was nodding his head. So.
Yeah, I know. Chair, I think it's probably a good point, but we need to bring that to, it's probably too early for the January committee, but we definitely do to the March committee to look at the impact over the first 2 months.
Oh. Okay.
Chair.
That's fine. Any other questions? Any other points? Okay. Thanks, members. There are no more questions. Therefore, I would like to move to the recommendations of page 269. These are to note and agree the work programme for the municipal year 2020-21. Members, if you are not in agreement, please can you raise your virtual hand now? Okay, Dan? Yeah, that's fine. Members, thank you. The recommendations are therefore agreed. Members, this now brings the meeting to a close. I would like to thank members and officers and also members of EY who are hovering in the background perhaps, who in attendance for their contributions. So thanks a lot everybody, and happy Christmas.